or 4 years to obtain a degree or certificate. Graduate programs are also available. In the United States, sign language interpreters have national and some states have a state-level certifications. The Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf (RID), a non-profit organization, is known for its national recognition and certification process. In addition to training requirements and stringent certification testing, the RID members must abide by a code of professional conduct, grievance processing, continuing education requirement. There are many interpreter training programs in the U.S. The Collegiate Commission on Interpreter Education is the body that accredits interpreter preparation programs. A list of accredited programs can be found on the CCIE website. European countries and countries elsewhere have their own National Association of Sign Language Interpreters. Some countries have more than one national association due to regional or language differences. The European Forum of Sign Language Interpreters (EFSLI) is the umbrella organization of sign language interpreters in Europe. In Canada, the professional association that recognizes and nationally certifies sign language interpreters is the Association of Visual Language Interpreters of Canada (AVLIC). Under AVLIC holds several affiliate chapters representing a specified region of Canada. Sign language interpreters encounter a number of linguistic, environmental, interpersonal and intrapersonal factors that can have an effect on their ability to provide accurate interpretation. Studies have found that most interpreter training programs do not sufficiently prepare students for the highly variable day-to-day stresses that an interpreter must manage, and there is an ongoing conversation in the interpreting field as to how to appropriately prepare students for the challenges of the job. Proposed changes include having a more robust definition of what a qualified interpreter should know, as well as a postgraduate internship structure that would allow new interpreters to work with the benefit of supervision from more experienced interpreters, much like the programs in place in medicine, law enforcement, etc. in Israel. Nama Weiss, a board member of Malik, the organization of the Israeli Sign Language Interpreters, advertised a video which she produced. It was her paraphrase of the video solo, and showed her viewpoint upon the Israeli Sign Language interpreters' jobs. A study which was made in Finland found that, in comparison to the foreign language teachers and non-linguistic experts, a high cooperativeness was found to be more characteristic to simultaneous and consecutive interpreters, and Weiss showed it in her video. Although she claimed to be comic media by its very nature, media interpreting has to be conducted in the simultaneous mode. It is provided particularly for live television coverage such as press conferences, live or taped interviews with political figures, musicians, artists, sportsmen or people from the business circle. In this type of interpreting, the interpreter has to sit in a soundproof booth where ideally she can see the speakers on a monitor in the set. All equipment should be checked before recording begins. In particular, satellite connections have to be double-checked to ensure that the interpreter's voice is not sent back and the interpreter gets to hear only one channel at a time. In the case of interviews recorded outside the studio in some current affairs program, the interpreter interprets what he or she hears on a TV monitor. Background noise can be a serious problem. The interpreter working for the media has to sound as slick and confident as a television presenter. Media interpreting has gained more visibility and presence, especially after the Gulf War. Television channels have begun to hire staff simultaneous interpreters. The interpreter renders the press conferences, telephone, beepers, interviews and similar live coverage for the viewers. It is more stressful than other types of interpreting as the interpreter has to deal with a wide range of technical problems coupled with the control room's hassle and wrangling during live coverage. Modalities interpreting services can be delivered in multiple modalities. The most common modality through which interpreting services are provided is on-site interpreting. On-site, also called in-person interpreting, or sometimes colloquialized as face-to-face. This delivery method requires the interpreter to be physically present in order for the interpretation to take place. In on-site interpreting settings, all of the parties who wish to speak to one another are usually located in the same place. This is by far the most common modality used for most public and social service settings. Telephone, also referred to as over-the-phone interpreting, telephonic interpreting, and tele-interpreting. Telephone interpreting enables interpretation via telephone. Telephone interpreting can be used in community settings as well as conference settings. Telephone interpreting may be used in place of on-site interpreting when no on-site interpreter is readily available at the location where services are needed. However, it is more commonly used for situations in which all parties who wish to communicate are already speaking to one another via telephone, e.g. telephone applications for insurance or credit cards, or telephone inquiries from consumers to businesses. Video interpretation services via video, remote interpreting, VRI, or a video relay service, VRS, are useful for spoken language barriers where visual cultural recognition is relevant, and even more applicable where one of the parties is deaf, hard of hearing, or speech impaired, mute. In such cases, the direction of interpretation is normally within the same principal language, such as French Sign Language (FSL) to spoken French and Spanish Sign Language (SSL) to spoken Spanish. Multilingual sign language interpreters, who can also translate as well across principal languages, such as to and from SSL, to and from spoken English, are also available, albeit less frequently. Such activities involve considerable effort on the part of the translator, since sign languages are distinct, natural languages with their own construction and syntax, different from the oral version of the same principal language. With video interpreting, sign language interpreters work remotely with live video and audio feeds, so that the interpreter can see the deaf or mute party, converse with the hearing party, and vice versa. Much like telephone interpreting, video interpreting can be used for situations in which no on-site interpreters are available. However, video interpreting cannot be used for situations in which all parties are speaking via telephone alone. VRI and VRS interpretation requires all parties to have the necessary equipment. Some advanced equipment enables interpreters to control the video camera in order to zoom in and out, and to point the camera toward the party that is signing. The majority of professional full-time conference interpreters work for phone interpreting agencies, healthcare institutions, courts, school systems, and international organizations like the United Nations. For the United Nations Interpretation Service, the European Union, or the African Union, the world's largest employer of interpreters is currently the European Commission, which employs hundreds of staff and freelance interpreters working into the official languages of the European Union and some others. The European Union's other institutions, the European Parliament and the European Court of Justice, have smaller interpreting services. The United Nations employs interpreters at almost all its sites throughout the world, because it has only 6 official languages. However, it is a smaller employer than the European Union. Interpreters may also work as freelance operators in their local, regional, and national communities, or may take on contract work under an interpreting business or service. They would typically take on work as described above. Militaries often use interpreters to better communicate with the local population. One notable example is the U.S. military during the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Associations. There are a number of interpreting and translation associations around the world, including NATI, National Accreditation Authority for Translators and Interpreters, AIIC, the International Association of Conference Interpreters, CADI, China Accreditation Test for Translators and Interpreters, CTTIC, Canadian Translators, Terminologists and Interpreters Council, and the Institute of Translation and Interpreting. In the UK, certifications. No worldwide testing or certification agency exists for all types of interpreters. For conference interpretation, there is the International Association of Conference Interpreters, or AIIC. Specific regions, countries, or even cities will have their own certification standards. In many cases, graduates of a certain caliber university program acts as a de facto certification for conference interpretation. CADI, the most recognized interpretation and translation certificate in PRC, is China Accreditation Test for Translation and Interpretation, short for CADI. It is entrusted by the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security of PRC. It is a translation and interpretation professional qualification accreditation test, which is implemented throughout the country according to uniform standards in order to assess examinees' bilingual translation or interpretation capability. CADI was introduced in 2003. In later 2013, translation and interpreting tests of different levels in English, French, Japanese, Russian, German, Spanish and Arabic were held across the nation. Use of translation and interpretation certificates. Those examinees who pass CADI and obtain translation and interpretation certificates acquire corresponding translation and interpretation professional titles. Senior Translator or Interpreter, Professor of Translation or Interpretation Level 1, Translator or Interpreter, Associate Professor of Translation or Interpretation Level 2, Translator or Interpreter, Translator or Interpreter Level 3, Translator or Interpreter, Assistant Translator or Interpreter. CADIs influence relevant institutions from Australia, France, Japan, the Republic of Korea, Singapore and other countries, as well as Hong Kong Special Administrative Region and the region of Taiwan have established work ties with CADI. Notes: interpreters were often ethnic and cultural mixtures, women, slaves or members of a subcaste, such as the Armenians and Jews in British India, as well as victims of kidnappings, conflict, and political upheaval. The majority of state court systems utilize a certification exam developed and administered by the National Center for State Courts. Most non-native speakers of English use the term sworn interpreter, which is calqued from a civil law position title common throughout the world. However, there is no common law country that uses this term. Syntax and linguistics. Syntax, syntax, is the set of rules, principles, and processes that govern the structure of sentences, sentence structure, in a given language, usually including word order. The term syntax is also used to refer to the study of such principles and processes. The goal of many syntacticians is to discover the syntactic rules common to all languages. In mathematics, syntax refers to the rules governing the notation of mathematical systems, such as formal languages.